Story 1. Many small local festivals, conventions, and markets were shut down. There were no events for 2 years, causing some places to lose their venues, face budgetary challenges, or lose volunteers and committee leaders. This situation is especially challenging for niche communities that used to come together. Story 2. The hospital where I work instituted a hiring freeze when the lockdowns began. At the same time, about 25% of my department quickly quit or retired for various reasons. Today, half of the vacant positions remain unfilled or were eliminated entirely, and our workload returned to pre-pandemic levels about 2 years ago. We are exhausted, boss. The lab is only managing to function through dark humor and the awareness of how much our patients depend on our results. Story 3. I have noticed a significant decrease in the overall quality of goods and products, even though prices have risen sharply. Although I could understand when supply chains were an issue or trade was disrupted by COVID-19 restrictions, it now seems that this decline may be permanent, which is disappointing. Story 4. I'm not sure if anyone else feels the same way, but my perception of time hasn't really returned to normal since then. Story 5. I noticed something changed with my college students. Many of them spent nearly 2 years isolated as teenagers. I can't define it, and I think they will eventually define it in a way I can't. It affected socializing in a profound way. Story 6. The public does not realize how burned out the medical system is. I am a doctor in my 60s, and every doctor I know in my age range is looking to retire as soon as possible. There will continue to be an exodus of experienced physicians over the next decade, and some specialties are struggling to fill that gap. Story 7. I feel like corporations and businesses no longer pretend to care about the consumer. They openly exploit you, knowing that you may have little recourse and will continue to purchase their products. Story 8. The fact that everything can change suddenly remains in people's minds. Many individuals lost a great deal during the COVID pandemic, including loved ones, health, jobs, hopes, and peace of mind. I believe people are struggling in general. Story 9. Companies have become less responsive. They do not answer calls or maintain proper heating. They increase their prices and avoid taking responsibility. Working with businesses feels more dystopian than it did before the pandemic. Story 10. Honestly, since COVID-19, everything feels artificial, including time. For whatever reason, time seems to be moving at an irregular rate. It's hard to explain, but I can't be the only one who feels this way. Story 11. Does anyone else feel that people are less reasonable? It seems like the attitude of holding on to past grievances, such as "you mentioned something about my earrings many years ago and I am still upset," has increased. Story 12. People drive recklessly now. People are far less courteous in general, but on the roads they are often dangerous. Story 13. Learning loss in children has been perceived by many parents and kids as a 2-year vacation. Now, states are reluctant to invest the funds needed to bridge that gap. Inflation in rent and real estate has nearly doubled and has not yet decreased. Grocery costs have significantly increased. Where families used to spend $275 to $300 a month, it is now common to spend over $500 at discount grocery stores. Story 14. There has been a noticeable decline in quality at several establishments. One example is Steak and Shake. Before COVID-19, they operated as a sit-down restaurant where you would be seated, your order taken, and food served to your table. It was one of the few restaurants where you could eat for under $10. The food was delicious, with juicy burgers and hot, fresh fries served on a plate. Now, however, it is worse than fast food chains. There are no human cashiers. You order at a kiosk, get your own drinks, choose a table to sit at, and wait 40 minutes to pick up your food. The burger tastes microwaved, and the fries are cold and stale. Story 15. Much corporate profit was made by exploiting supply chain issues for as long as possible and reducing production to maintain high profit margins. Story 16. Education. I taught before, during, and after COVID, and I still do. The students lack the social and classroom skills necessary to understand and follow simple rules. We refer to children entering kindergarten and younger as COVID babies. It has been both amazing and frustrating to observe the differences between before and now. Many skills are missing due to the shutdown and the significant adjustments required to return to school under restrictions. I worry that these issues will persist for years to come and may not improve. Story 17. Everything feels like a scam now, or at least every transaction in our daily lives has a greater potential for the consumer to be taken advantage of. In addition to everything just costing more but offering less value, being smaller, and lasting half as long, there are hidden clauses, higher and more obscure fees and cancellation policies, fake goods disguised in normally trustworthy marketplaces, deceptive pricing or compensation advertisements, bait and switch marketing, and automatic tips that still allow for additional gratuities. The cash register displays a 40% tip option on the left side, followed by 35%, 30%, and 25% from left to right, with no option to skip. There are countless additional ways we get taken advantage of every day beyond the usual strains of inflation, housing, and food costs. Story 18. Repressed trauma will likely haunt me one day. Apart from that, the effects on the information technology and creative job market are still visible. The entire industry is slightly out of balance. Story 19. Literally millions of cases of disability arise from post-viral syndrome. My wife has been in constant pain for 2 years. My buddy's sister has a doctorate in physics and couldn't even remember the order of the days of the week for months afterward. It's an enormous issue with no good answers, so it is often ignored. Story 20. It might seem unusual, but we still refuse to cooperate for the greater good. It was a common belief that when times get tough, humanity would collectively work together to address threats. We did not do that during COVID-19. Some individuals became worse versions of themselves and showed a lack of empathy for others. Our society grew angrier. Our society remains very angry and continues to refuse to cooperate. Story 21. Health-wise, we are only just learning. One thing I learned this week is that many patients who lost a kidney due to cancer and then contracted COVID-19 are experiencing dramatically reduced kidney function and require permanent dialysis after COVID-19. Story 22. As a family, we stopped going to restaurants during COVID-19 and we have never returned. Before the pandemic, we probably went 1 to 2 times a month. I imagine there are many others like us. The same goes for haircuts. I learned to cut my boys' hair during the pandemic and they now have no desire to return to a professional. We also got our dog during that time, so I learned to groom her from the start. We are essentially missing out on economic activity. If it weren't for COVID-19, we would probably still eat at restaurants, still take our boys for professional haircuts, and possibly take our dog to a groomer. Story 23. This will get buried, but lockdowns wiped out my savings. I own a small store, and while I did not have to borrow to survive the lockdowns, all of my pension savings went to keeping my employees paid, mortgage, and other bills. Even though the shop is doing great now, the prices for stock have risen 20%. To keep competing with the internet, my prices have only gone up 10%, driving my profits down. So we stay afloat, but the pension fund remains empty. It stings sometimes to hear people complaining about how expensive everything is and how much cheaper online retailers are. Many shopkeepers I know are even worse off. They had to borrow from family and friends. They did not go to the banks, which were unwilling to lend them anything anyway. So much of the stress is hidden away. Nobody talks about it because, in general, we shopkeepers don't. We feel embarrassed that we can't manage on our own, that we need help. This is something that is truly hidden. Story 24. Manufacturing and shipping became more expensive, so companies had to raise prices. Those costs have returned to pre-pandemic rates, but product prices have remained high. This is the primary reason why nearly every large company has reported record profits this year and last year. Story 25. I am an English teacher, and reading comprehension has been particularly challenging since COVID-19. No grade level has fully recovered. Story 26. Increase in car and motorcycle accidents. People's cognitive skills are not what they used to be, and many do not even realize it. Additionally, some individuals are experiencing medical events related to COVID-19 while driving. Story 27. I always believed that when push came to shove as a society and a species, we would prioritize human lives ahead of money. Then COVID-19 showed that this was a matter of debate for far too many people. I think my fundamental view of the world has been shaken. I am more pessimistic and misanthropic than I used to be. I feel like, in general, I cannot truly trust anyone except myself. I am also less interested in long-term planning and have more of a "we could all die tomorrow" attitude towards things. I doubt I am the only person still trying to process the mental and personality aftermath of the pandemic. Story 28. I have had COVID-19 twice, and I often forget many things, entire conversations, items, and tasks. It is slowly tearing my life apart. Story 29. It seems that companies have found more efficient ways to cut jobs, reduce hours, and harm the working class. Additionally, there is the issue of shrinkflation. Story 30. On a personal note, I started experiencing chronic migraines, fatigue, and cognitive fog right after COVID-19. I have worked with my family doctor, internal medicine teams, neurologists, and others. 2 years later, things still aren't better. I mowed my relatively small lawn today and have felt exhausted all day since. My head is pounding, I have an intermittent feverish feeling, and more. I used to hike 15 to 20 kilometers weekly and exercise daily. Honestly, I am unsure if I will ever regain that level of functionality as this situation continues to persist. The bigger picture is that I am one of over 2 million people in my country who are facing this scenario. Almost half of those who experienced prolonged COVID-19 symptoms are still dealing with ongoing issues. Story 31. COVID caused the death of over 7 million people, all of whom have families, loved ones, friends, and coworkers. The grief alone is a cultural crisis. The pain of not being able to hold or travel to funerals due to the disease, as well as travel restrictions and financial issues, adds to the suffering. I do not know a single person in my life who was able to grieve normally during that time. Grief does not just go away if it is not addressed. It gets worse. My own family has been deeply affected since we lost several people to COVID and other diseases over the past couple of years. We have not been able to see each other, and everyone is too financially constrained to host a service. I resent that most people where I live have embraced the idea that everything is back to normal. Life will never be the same without the people we have lost. Story 32. There has been a noticeable decline in tolerance, intelligence, and self-awareness in the general public. Story 33. The unit I worked on as a registered nurse in the hospital turned into a COVID unit, and I am still being treated for post-traumatic stress disorder to this day. I know many nurses and other healthcare workers are receiving treatment for it as well, but it is not something that is widely discussed outside of work. Story 34. All these comments are mostly focused on societal and economic consequences, but I think the real medical harms are barely understood and may not be known for decades. We know that the virus affects cardiovascular systems and can cause unusual effects on the nervous system and brain, but I don't think we truly understand the ramifications of younger people dying early or living with disabilities due to heart failure, or what a collective drop in intelligence will do to society. Story 35. There is significant price gouging across various services. Businesses received government bailouts but continued to raise prices due to lost sales in 2020. They have maintained these high prices because consumers are willing to pay. Concert tickets, restaurant meals, and all forms of travel have all seen substantial price increases for the same services. There is no justification for this, yet people are blaming the president for inflation when it is the companies that are being greedy. Notably, retailers like Target have recently begun lowering prices, demonstrating that they could have survived without such price hikes. Story 36. There is less liveliness in crowds nowadays. I can't explain it, but when I attended concerts in 2019, they felt different compared to today. It seems like people are going through the motions now, unlike 5 years ago when everything felt genuine. Story 37. COVID-19 has caused me to suffer from permanent heart issues. I have long COVID, which has resulted in a valve that occasionally stops working and reduces blood flow to my brain. This condition has a 10% mortality rate and has occurred about once a year. If I experience an episode, I may be fine, but I risk losing consciousness and could die if I am unable to restore blood flow to my head. It's a concerning situation, as I might face life-threatening events each year. Story 38. There are multiple cubicles in the building where I work that still have March 2019 calendars on the walls. I don't think they are coming back. Story 39. We are still more isolated than we were before the pandemic. Contactless food delivery and ordering remain common. Working from home has reached a point where commercial real estate is struggling. It seems my comment is being interpreted by many as suggesting that these things are negative. I did not intend to imply that any of these developments are good or bad. I was simply listing a few observations from my daily life. Story 40. The dog I got during the pandemic is quite difficult. She was never properly socialized because dog parks and restaurants, even outdoors, were closed for months in my area. We didn't have many visitors, so she is not fond of guests. Since we worked from home, she dislikes it when we leave often. She loves us, but she can be unwelcoming to everyone else. Story 41. Long COVID has kept me off work for 27 months so far with no end in sight. It took more than 6 months of testing and insisting that something was wrong through multiple doctors to finally receive a diagnosis. Unfortunately, this diagnosis does not lead to any real medical intervention or treatment. I have spoken with several individuals who experienced similar symptoms or at least lasting fatigue after having COVID but did not seek medical attention. Estimates suggest that around 1 in 5 people who had COVID ended up with long COVID, but that only accounts for diagnosed cases. I believe many individuals are still dealing with lingering effects and do not know what is wrong, just as I was. Story 42. People seem to have forgotten how to drive after months of staying home, and those skills never came back. I don't know if it's that or just a lack of courtesy, but in general, people's driving has become significantly worse in the last few years. I drove for about 20 years before the pandemic and had only been run off the road by a bad driver maybe once or twice. Now it happens monthly because no one stays in their lane. Story 43. One positive aspect is that people stay home from work when they are sick much more often than before. I don't know about you all, but I have caught far fewer colds since the pandemic than I did before. Instead of several times a year, I get maybe one a year at most. Story 44. Everything happening with the economy now is a result of COVID-19 and the government response to it. COVID-19 hits and the global economy grinds to a halt as people stop traveling, going out, shopping, and more. The sharpest recession ever takes place. Trillions of stimulus dollars are introduced into the economy via direct payments and Paycheck Protection Program loans to prevent a deep economic depression. People are staying home and not spending, allowing them to save more money than ever. The economy reopens. Demand is through the roof. Supply chains are severely disrupted, causing items to be both scarce and in high demand. Low supply and high demand lead to rising prices. People have the cash so they can purchase the things they want. Companies cannot produce enough and need workers. 1 million Americans died. Many retired during COVID-19, and companies are struggling to find labor. They are willing to pay what it takes to hire you. Welcome to the Great Resignation and inflation. Inflation is rising unsustainably. The Federal Reserve raises interest rates to slow down demand. The goal is to literally slow the economy, encouraging people to spend less and cooling the labor market. We are here now. Notice how you aren't seeing now hiring signs everywhere? Jobs are not as easy to find anymore. Try finding a job in technology right now. Some parts of the labor market are still in demand, but for the most part, it's a struggle. Prices remain high, but fortunately aren't rising as fast. Everyone's extra money has been spent, and now we are back to our old ways, except everything is significantly higher in price. Want to borrow money for a new car or buy a house? That will come with interest rates 2 to 3 times what they were before, and for cars and homes that are 20 to 50% more expensive. Cash is not cheap anymore, and the faucet is shut off. What happens next? I guess we will see. I have my theories, and they aren't pleasant. My advice is to be financially prepared for tough times. COVID-19 will have economic reverberations for many years. It changed many facets of our society permanently. Story 45. Don't know if anyone has mentioned this, but how about shrinkflation and price gouging? Companies are just getting away with it. Not to mention the enormous pollution to the environment and the amount of wasted plastics when you have a large plastic container half filled with product at double the price. Story 46. The decline of cinema occurred as many people realized it is more convenient to stream a movie at home rather than go to a theater. Story 47. There are many answers, but perhaps they are too obvious. The most significant effect of COVID-19 that continues today is the ongoing impact of the pandemic. Thousands of people are dying from COVID-19 every day, yet this is not widely reported. No one discusses it. Senior homes are reporting more deaths from COVID-19 than from the flu, which was already a major source of elderly mortality. The single biggest lingering effect of COVID-19 is that people continue to die in large numbers. This number is significant enough that if we weren't desensitized to it, there would be an enormous outcry. Story 48. So many more people are socially inept. I have worked in retail pharmacy for 10 years. It is staggering to see how much people struggle to interact with my staff like normal adults compared to before the pandemic. People have always been difficult, but the post-COVID era has introduced a new level of challenges. I have banned many more individuals after COVID than I did before, and I was likely more prone to issuing bans back then. In addition to introverts, who are almost never a problem for retail workers, if you cannot go out with a friend and engage in activities with strangers, please take some time to understand why and work on improving it. This generalized rule of thumb does not apply to introverts, who likely are not the issue. Story 49. The general mistrust of science is concerning. While vaccine skepticism existed before COVID-19, it was mostly limited to fringe groups. Now, it seems that many people hold anti-vaccination views, believe in flat earth theories, or deny climate change. It is disheartening to witness such a significant regression in public understanding. Story 50. I am convinced that people who are at a certain age, when their brains were still developing, have been significantly affected. Everyone I encounter who is currently between the ages of 15 and 20 seems so confused. I do not mean confused in a philosophical sense, but rather in a way that they appear completely lost in their daily interactions. They often have the same puzzled expression on their faces. I am not yet old enough to dismiss this as a kids these days issue. They genuinely seem to be struggling. Or who knows, maybe it's social media and I am just getting older. I expect this might quickly become my most downvoted comment ever. Story 51. A lot of people are getting sick more often and we all act like it's fine. It's not. COVID-19 and the lack of proper mitigation are weakening us as a species. There is also a related increase in people experiencing brain fog, which makes functioning really difficult. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.